I think the next 3 games, Horwat, are of mass importance for the Pittsburgh Penguins early in this season. They have currently lost 3 straight games, had a lead or were tied in the third period in their last 2, but they weren't able to get the job done. They weren't able to finish. And in the case of Tuesday night, they blew a lead in the last minute of regulation. And anytime you do that, typically you don't deserve to get that extra point. Once you get into overtime, of course, they fall victim in shootout. But now they've lost 3 straight. Now it feels like things are kind of closing in, especially with 3 very tough matchups coming up on the pike for them. Friday night, they go up against the 2-4-1 Edmonton Oilers. I know the record isn't impressive, but this is still a team that went to the Stanley Cup final. This is still a team that went to Game 7 of the Cup final last year. And let's also not forget, this is a team that always matches up very well with the Pittsburgh Penguins. So they have that one. Saturday night on the second half of a back-to-back, they go to Vancouver to take on the 3-1-2 Canucks to round out a 4-game Western Canada road trip. That's a tough matchup. And then, like I mentioned, when they come home, they're going to be welcomed with open arms by Flower, Marc-Andre Fleury, in an emotional game against a team that has been very good to start the season. 4-0-2 are the Minnesota Wild. So all of a sudden, the Pittsburgh Penguins have a tough 3-game stretch to where if you don't get your act together, if you play the way that you've played for the majority of the past 3 games, we could be looking at a 6-game losing streak early in this season. How pivotal do you think this stretch is at the end of October?
Extremely. I'm trying to find the last time the Penguins even beat the Oilers, starting with the next game up. It's been quite a while, and they have not been close games. It genuinely looks like the last time it happened was December 20th, 2019. We're talking a pre-COVID meeting between the Oilers and Penguins. That's how long it's been. It doesn't matter how good or bad the Oilers look on in their record right now. Think of it very much at this moment like the Blackhawks forever. As good or as bad as the Blackhawks were, for some reason, they had the Penguins number. Even when the Penguins were winning back-to-back cups, I think the Blackhawks still beat them all the time. Not to mention,
certainly when it was in Chicago, they didn't win in Chicago for like 15 years.
Yeah, no kidding. And especially to kick off the year where they started whenever they were going for 3 in 2017-18, they trounced them 10-1. So the Blackhawks were always on that level. Didn't matter how good or bad they were. This goes for the Oilers right now too. And here's the thing about the Oilers: they're 2-4-1. That's a very good team.
Yeah,
that team could still turn it around and punt out a Stanley Cup appearance, championship, whatever you want to put it. And this horrible stretch of they're all multi-goal games that the Oilers have put up on the Penguins. So before even getting into the Vancouver Canucks, who are also the Vancouver Canucks and off to I can't remember their start, but off to a good start, 3-1-2. The Wild are off to a shockingly good start. Before we even get to those two, you got a beast in front of you with the Edmonton Oilers, especially a hungry one that is looking to really prove something now.
Yeah, and here's the thing. In totality, styles make fights. Connor McDavid against a team that we're talking about, their biggest issue is team defense. That's worrisome going into Friday night. But just outside of the individual matchups, you cannot, and I can't stress this enough, you cannot lose 6 straight this early and expect to be a team that is going to be sitting in a half-decent position towards the middle part and end of the season. If you lose all 3 of these games, let's say they lose them in regulation, you're 3-7-1 at that point through 11 games. That is your worst start in the past 3 seasons. What happened the last 2 years? You missed the playoffs because of a slow start and you couldn't quite make up the ground. If you go to 3-7-1, I know that right now, if you look in the standings, and we always preach, don't look at the standings too early. But if you look in the standings and you're looking for a little bit of solace, yeah, sure. They sit in 4th in the Metro despite a poor start. But they've played only 1 less game than New Jersey. That's the only team that's played more than them. They've played 1 more than Philly, and they've played 2 more than the rest of the entire division. So these other teams are going to get opportunities to make up that ground on the Penguins fairly easily. If you're 3-7-1, you're going to be in a tough position at the end of October, as you have been for the last couple of seasons. I mean, last year, they were 5-6-0 through the first 11 games, and they were 8th in the Metro last. 2022, they were 4-5-2, which was good for 7th in the Metro through 11 games. If you're 3-7-1, I have a hard time believing you're not going to be 7th or 8th in the Metro again, and you're going to be fighting from behind. And I understand We haven't seen the best out of Sidney Crosby. We haven't seen the best out of Erik Karlsson or Kris Letang. We might have seen the best out of Evgeni Malkin in that first week of the season. But again, even him, the last 3 games, he's kind of taken that step backward as the rest of the team has. The bottom 6 has looked good. The special teams has looked good. The goaltenders in spurts have looked good, or I should say 2 of 3 of them have looked good in spurts. But you need to put it together, and you need to do it quickly, because if you keep falling behind the 8 ball, I'm not going to be able to trust them to be able to come back, because the last 2 years, yeah, they've made it close, but you didn't get the job done. If you fall further back than you have in the past, it's going to make it much harder for them to get out in front this season.
Yeah, put it this way. 3-9-1 was enough to get Jay Woodcroft fired in Edmonton, speaking of the Oilers. Now, what did they do? Rifled off enough to go to the Stanley Cup final. Now, that was helped along by a 16-game winning streak.
Yeah.
Penguins are probably not capable of something like that.
I mean, that exactly. Like, this team, outside of that tail end last year, this is not a team that goes on a lot of winning streaks the last couple of seasons. And I don't see the material changes being made to where I think they can do it again this year. This is a team that's going to be like, hey, we need to go 3-1 this week. We need to go 2-2 another week. We need to go 3-1 again this week. It's not a team that's going to be able to say, hey, we haven't lost in 3 weeks. Like, there's too many holes in this team right now to believe that they can do that.
Not at this very moment, no. If they put things together and maybe some things start to improve and start to look solid, have that discussion in later months. You know, it just, as of right now, in the late stages of October, going into November, probably even into December, you're not going to have a team like that. And I say that because even if they do go 3-7-1 down to whatever else it may be, it's not the end of the season. There is still time to turn things around.
Mm-hmm.
But you got to, and the Oilers did it last season with it's tough to compare rosters. The Oilers roster wasn't that deep last year.
It wasn't, but they did have a guy that scored over 130 points.
Exactly. Probably had a couple. But
yeah,
they had a guy that scored over 130 points, a guy that put up 50 goals, and, you know, the Stuart Skinner figured it out somehow. I'm not saying those things also can't happen in Pittsburgh. If Sidney Crosby can easily put up 100. Tristan Jarry could figure it out, possibly.
Joel Blomqvist and Alex Nedeljkovic could figure it out, and they could figure out it. Never mind. We're not getting into it.
Exactly. Someone could figure it out. And for what it's worth, if it really is Sullivan's job on the line here, Gerard Gallant would be a nice little, here's a pick-me-up. Anyway, enough of that. But just spitballing here that it's not totally over, even if you do lose these games, but this team cannot play behind the 8 ball, especially if they don't plan on making those harsh changes like I just mentioned.
Yeah, I don't remember what Elliot Friedman says it every year. If you're so many points out by American Thanksgiving, 80% of teams don't make the playoffs. If you lose these next 3 and get behind the 8 ball, it's going to be hard.
I think it's in a playoff spot by American Thanksgiving. I think he cuts it to like 5 points by Halloween. I forget how he does it.
Yeah, but you can see what we're saying here. You need to collect points, and you can't be collecting them one at a time like they did in Calgary, especially when you score a go-ahead goal with 6 minutes left in the game, and you're leading with 60 seconds left in the game. You have to get those points there. Especially on the road against a good team when you had played as well as they played through the majority of that second half of the game, right? They were great in the second period. They were good in the third period, getting those leads, even though they gave up that lead. I believe it was halfway through that shot from the point from Mackenzie Weegar. They were able to bounce back and kind of take momentum back on their side. And then with the last 6 minutes, they did a Sullivan. They pulled into a shell and turtled and said, listen, we're just going to try to play it in our zone and try to play team defense. That's not been your strong suit all season. That's not a recipe for success. They had to keep the foot on the gas at least a little bit. They didn't. There was a lot of icings. It was a lot of gain the red line and dump it deep. But a lot of those dumps kind of set up Flames players to come out of the zone. So they just in-game have to be better. And when you look at the big picture, if we get to Thursday, if we get to Halloween and we're talking about, the upstart Ducks coming to town, can the Penguins avoid a 7-game losing streak? They're going to be sitting in a very, very, very bad position that, listen, I'm not going to say it's going to put a nail in the coffin on their season, but I will say I started this year saying, hey, they're a bubble playoff team in my eyes. And I think that they're ahead of the pack when it comes to the teams that are in that area, the Capitals, the Red Wings, the There's another one I'm missing. The Sabres are a team that is expected to make that jump. The Senators are always a team that has high expectations early in the season. I thought the Penguins coming into the year had a chance to be in that realm and kind of at the top of that list. You lose these 3 games, I start to think, all right, you're probably a team that is going to need to get hot and get one of those hot streaks to get back into that conversation of being among the top that are in fighting for those wild card positions.